All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Evelyn, home-based custom cake baker. The scent of vanilla and despair has a distinct texture. It's a fine, sugary dust that coats the back of your throat, a cloying sweetness that makes the acid in your stomach churn all the more violently. My world had shrunk to the four walls of a therapist's office that smelled exactly like that. A place that was supposed to be a sanctuary, but had become an execution chamber. Dr. Evans, with her kind eyes and infuriatingly calm voice, was speaking, her words a gentle drizzle against the hurricane roaring in my ears. And Christopher, how did that make you feel when Evelyn said she needed more transparency with your schedules? I wasn't listening to him. My entire being was focused on the phone. His phone, a sleek, black rectangle of obsidian that lay on the armrest of his chair, a hair's breadth from his thigh. It was the third time it had lit up with a notification in the last 20 minutes. Not a call, a text. Each time the screen glowed, a silent, pulsating heart of secrets in the dim, soothingly lit room. Each time his body went rigid, a statue of forced nonchalance. Each time his eyes, which had been performing a masterful impression of contrite engagement, flickered towards it with a panic so raw it was almost animal. This was our last resort. This sterile room with its abstract art and boxes of tissues placed at strategic intervals was the Hail Mary pass for a 9-year marriage that was crumbling into dust. We had built a life with twin girls who had my smile and his stubbornness, a life in a house that always smelled of baking sugar and fresh coffee, a life of inside jokes and shared dreams that had somehow faded, like old photographs left in the sun. I had thought the problem was distance, the slow, silent creep of apathy that settles into long marriages. I thought we were here to relearn each other's language. The phone lit up again. This time, I saw the name, Jenna, illuminated in stark white letters against the dark screen. Jenna, the new colleague, the one he'd mentioned in that offhand way men do when they don't want you to pay too much attention. Oh, Jenna from marketing, she's sharp, we're heading the new campaign together. My own heart didn't just sink, it free fell, shattering every rib on its way down. The vanilla scent turned suffocating. Dr. Evans was saying something about active listening. Christopher was muttering a reply, his voice a low, distant rumble, and all I could see was that name. Jenna, texting him during our couple's therapy session. A memory, sharp and unbidden, sliced through the numbness. 3 nights ago, we were in the kitchen, me up to my elbows in buttercream frosting for a unicorn cake for a little girl's 7th birthday. He was on the stool, scrolling through his phone. Our song, Truly, Madly, Deeply by Savage Garden, a relic from our early, careless days, came on the old radio we kept on the counter. A wave of nostalgia hit me, a desperate, aching pull towards the people we used to be. I'd reached for him, my hand, sticky with pink icing, moving to touch his wrist. He had flinched. It wasn't a jump. It was a recoil. A full-bodied, involuntary jerk away from my touch, as if my fingers were made of fire. His phone had clattered to the granite countertop. He'd looked at me, not with annoyance, but with pure, undiluted terror for a split second before his face smoothed over into an apology. Sorry, honey, you startled me, lost in this report. The flinch, that was the first crack. A hairline fracture in the foundation of everything I believed to be true. Now, in this room, with the evidence glowing on his screen, the crack became a canyon. The flinch wasn't about being startled. It was about being caught. It was the gut reaction of a man guarding a secret so big, the simple, innocent touch of his wife felt like a threat. Evelyn, Dr. Evans's voice cut through the static in my head. You seem distant. Would you like to share what you're feeling right now? I couldn't breathe. The air was solid, made of sugar and betrayal. I looked at Christopher, really looked at him. I saw the fine sheen of sweat on his temple, the way his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle ticked. He was a stranger. A handsome, familiar stranger sitting in the chair where my husband was supposed to be. I'm feeling, I started, my voice a ghost of itself. It trailed off. My hand, resting on my own knee, moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was an instinct, a compulsion, a need to test the theory, to feel the truth of that flinch one more time. My fingers reached across the small space between our chairs, aiming slowly, deliberately for his phone. His reaction was instantaneous and violent. He snatched the phone away, clutching it to his chest like a lifeline, his body curling around it protectively. His eyes wide, wild. "What are you doing?" he hissed, the veneer of the remorseful husband evaporating in an instant. The room went utterly silent. The only sound was the frantic thudding of my own heart against my eardrums. Dr. Evans watched, her pen still poised over her notepad, and in that silence the dam broke. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper that scraped my throat raw. "It's her, isn't it, Jenna?" The color drained from his face. That was all the confirmation I needed. It was a physical blow, a sucker punch to the soul. The images flooded me, unbidden, cruel, him laughing with her over coffee, his hand on the small of her back, whispered conversations, late nights at the office, the new cologne, the forgotten anniversary, every missed dinner, every distracted kiss, every time he'd been too tired for us. It all crystallized around that one name, that one flinch, this one definitive act of guarding his secret from me in the one place we were supposed to be stripping them bare. "Evelyn, let's not jump to conclusions," Dr. Evans began, her voice a practiced calm I wanted to shatter. "Conclusions?" I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He flinched when I touched his phone. He's flinching now. Look at him, he's guarding it with his life in a therapist's office. What conclusion is there to jump to? This isn't a conclusion. This is the grand finale. I stood up. My legs were weak, but they held. The world tilted on its axis, the vanilla-scented room spinning. I looked down at Christopher, at the man I had loved for over a decade, the father of my children, who was now just a guilty boy hiding his toy. All this, I gestured around the room, at the boxes of tissues and the abstract art that promised healing. All this was a performance. You were never here to fix us. You were here to learn how to lie better. To manage me. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't look at the therapist. I walked out of that room, out of that building, and into the blinding Idaho sun. I walked away from the scent of vanilla and despair, and into the clean, sharp smell of my own burning future. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know about the pottery classes, or the Japanese language apps, or the night I would set a pyre of his possessions in our backyard. I didn't know about the bookstore, or the man who would know every line from Better Off Dead. All I knew was the ground had given way, and I was falling. And the only thing left to do was to learn how to fly on the way down. The steering wheel was cold and slick beneath my palms, a stark contrast to the feverish heat burning under my skin. I drove away from Dr. Evans's office on autopilot, the familiar streets of our Idaho town blurring into meaningless streaks of color. The vanilla scent was gone, replaced by the sterile, recycled air of the car, but the phantom sweetness clung to the back of my throat, making me want to gag. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside, a solid block of ice in my chest where my heart used to be. My phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat. Christopher, then Dr. Evans, then Christopher again. A flurry of texts, apologies spiraling into defensiveness, then back to pleading. I didn't read them. The screen was a vortex of lies, and I had just escaped one. I turned the phone face down. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the tires on asphalt and the ragged sound of my own breathing. I didn't go home. I couldn't face the empty house, the ghosts of our life together waiting to ambush me in every room. The girls, my beautiful twin girls, were at a weekend sleepover at my sister's. A fortuitous coincidence that felt like both a blessing and a curse. I was alone with this new, terrible knowledge, and the silence was a canvas for the horrific images my mind began to paint. Him and Jenna, laughing in a conference room. His hand, the one that had worn my wedding band for 9 years, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Whispered jokes I wasn't a part of, late nights that weren't about work. The new, expensive cologne he'd started wearing, was it for her? The way he'd been so overly attentive at Christmas, buying me a ridiculously expensive necklace. Guilt gifts. The pieces of the puzzle, which I had stubbornly tried to force into a picture of a midlife crisis or work stress, now snapped together with a sickening, final click. The complete image was one of my husband as a stranger, a consummate actor in the play of our life, and I was the only one who hadn't been given the revised script. I found myself parked outside a large hardware store, the engine off, staring at the sliding glass doors without any memory of having driven there. My body knew what it needed to do before my mind had caught up. I walked inside, The fluorescent lights a harsh interrogation after the dim therapy room. I moved through the aisles with a single-minded purpose I hadn't felt in years. I bought a large metal trash can, the biggest one they had. Then I went to the gardening section and picked up a container of lighter fluid. The cashier, a pimply teenager, didn't even look at me twice. I was just another suburban woman with a chore. If only he knew the chore was the systematic incineration of a marriage. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house looked different. It wasn't our home anymore. It was a crime scene, a museum of a life that had been a carefully constructed lie. The white picket fence we'd painted together last summer now seemed like a barricade. The porch swing where we'd cuddled on summer nights was just a collection of wood and chains. I carried the metal can to the center of the backyard, the grass still damp from the morning sprinklers. The act of dragging it across the lawn was physical, grounding. Then I began the excavation. I started with his study, the sanctum sanctorum where he'd spent so many late nights. I didn't sift or sort. I was an avalanche of grief and rage. I pulled framed photographs from the walls, our wedding day, his smile now looking like a smirk. The picture of him holding our newborn daughters, a moment I had thought was the purest joy of his life. I opened drawers, sweeping their contents into a large cardboard box. His favorite pen, the silly World's Best Dad mug the girls had made him, the leather-bound journal he never wrote in but liked the look of. I took the crisp, tailored dress shirts from his side of the closet, the ones he wore for work, for her. I took the bottle of that new cologne and threw it in. I was a force of nature, indiscriminate and devastating. The box was heavy, overflowing with the detritus of a shared life. I hauled it downstairs and out into the backyard, dumping the contents unceremoniously into the metal can. The objects landed with a series of dull thuds and the shattering of glass from the picture frames. I went back for a second load. And a third. I wasn't just removing his things, I was performing an exorcism. Each item I carried out was a memory being stripped of its power, a ghost being laid to rest. The pyramid of our past grew in the metal drum. A silk tie tangled with a photo of us on the beach in Hawaii. A book of poetry he'd read to me when we were dating, now just paper fuel. The ugly vase his mother had given us, which I'd always hated, but now felt a strange kinship with, it, too, had been an unwitting participant in the farce. The sun began to dip below the fence line, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a dramatic, beautiful backdrop for my ugly ritual. I stood there, chest heaving, sweat and tears mingling on my face. The ice in my chest had melted, replaced by a roaring, all-consuming fire. This was the mini-climax, the point of no return. The silent, numb woman from the car was gone. In her place stood a primal creature, forged in betrayal. I picked up the lighter fluid. The sound it made as I sprayed it over the pile was a harsh, chemical hiss, the smell acrid and potent. It soaked into the silk, the paper, the wood. I emptied the entire canister until the contents were drenched, until the air swam with the volatile fumes. My hands were shaking. From the porch light, I retrieved a long, wooden match. I struck it against the side of the box. The flare was sudden and bright, a tiny, dancing sun at my fingertips. For a moment, I hesitated, the finality of the act looming over me. This wasn't just burning his things, this was burning the bridge back. This was accepting that the man I loved was dead, and this was his funeral. I threw the match. The whump of ignition was a physical force, a blast of heat that pushed me back a step. Flames, orange and blue and hungry, erupted from the can, licking at the twilight. They consumed the photographs first, the faces of our past curling and blackening, dissolving into ash. The silk of his ties sizzled. The wood of the picture frames popped and crackled like gunfire. I stood and watched, my arms wrapped around myself, as the fire grew, a raging, beautiful monster in my backyard. The heat dried the tears on my cheeks. I didn't feel happy, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clean, purged. The lies, the deceit, the weight of his secret, it was all being transformed into smoke and embers, rising into the darkening Idaho sky. This was my grief. Not quiet sobs into a pillow, but a loud, defiant, destructive act. I was burning it all down so I could see what, if anything, was left standing in the ashes. And as I watched our history turn to smoke, I realized with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity that I was not afraid of the emptiness that would follow. I was the one who would decide what would be built in its place. The fire roared, and for the first time since that flinch in the kitchen, I felt truly, madly, deeply awake. The ashes in the metal can were still warm 2 days later, a gray, gritty monument in the center of my perfect lawn. The smell of smoke had seeped into everything, a permanent campfire scent clinging to my hair, my clothes, the very walls of the house. It was the smell of finality. Christopher had not come home. He'd texted once, a terse, "I'm at a hotel. We need to talk about the girls." The man who had flinched from my touch was now flinching from the entire structure of his life. I didn't reply. Talking was what got us into that vanilla-scented hellhole. Action was what I had left. The silence in the house was a physical presence. It was heavier now, without the frantic energy of my burning rage to hold it at bay. The twins were back from my sisters, their laughter and squabbles a surreal counterpoint to the cataclysm that had reshaped their world. I had sat them down, my stomach a knot of cold dread, and told them a sanitized version of the truth. Daddy and I are having some very big problems. We need to live apart for a while. It is not your fault. We both love you more than anything. Chloe, my little pragmatist, had asked if she could still have her birthday party at the zoo. Lily, my empath, had burst into tears and asked if Daddy didn't love us anymore. Holding her while she sobbed, I felt the ice in my chest reform, this time shielding not just my heart, but theirs. In the days that followed, I moved through my life like a ghost. I baked. I filled the silence with the mechanical whir of the stand mixer, the comforting ritual of measuring flour and sugar. I created towering, whimsical cakes, a castle for a princess, a rocket ship for an astronaut, each one a perfect, beautiful lie, much like my marriage had been. The joy was gone from it. It was just motion, a way to fill the hours between school runs and bedtime stories. The mini-climax of the fire had passed, and the bleak reality of the aftermath set in. This was the grinding dailiness of grief. Waking up alone in a bed that still smelled faintly of him. Making coffee for one. Seeing his side of the garage empty, the space where his car used to be a gaping mouth of absence. I was a balloon cut from its string, drifting aimlessly in a vast, empty sky. It was during one of these aimless drifts, while scrolling through my phone at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, that I found it. The Boise Community Arts Center website, a pop-up ad for a beginner's pottery class starting the next week. Find your center, get your hands dirty, create something from nothing. The tagline felt like a challenge. My life was in ashes. Could I create something from that? Simultaneously, another tab was open, a language learning app. I'd selected Japanese on a whim. It was the farthest thing from my reality, a complex, beautiful system of characters that held no memories of Christopher, no echoes of our shared life. It was a clean slate, a code to crack that had nothing to do with the code of a cheating husband's lies. I signed up for both. It wasn't a moment of inspired triumph. It was an act of desperation, a Hail Mary pass thrown by a drowning woman. The pottery studio was a cavernous, high-ceilinged room that smelled of damp clay and earth. It was a world away from my sterile, sugar-dusted kitchen. I felt immediately out of place, surrounded by bohemian-looking women and a few serene-looking men, all of whom seemed to know exactly how to wedge clay without it looking like a murder scene. Our instructor, a woman named Anya with sinewy arms and a calm smile, demonstrated the centering process on the wheel. "The clay will fight you," she said, her hands a steady, confident force on the spinning gray lump. "It has its own will. Your job is not to dominate it but to find a partnership with it. You must be firm but gentle. Listen to what it's telling you." My first attempt was a disaster. The moment I touched the spinning clay, it wobbled violently, lost its center, and splattered across my apron in a wet, sad slap. A wave of hot frustration brought tears to my eyes. It felt like a metaphor for my entire life, completely off-center, a messy, uncontrollable failure. I looked at the ruined clay, then at my hands, covered in cold, gray sludge, and I thought of Christopher. I thought of how I had tried to center my life around him, our marriage, our family, and how he had wobbled and thrown everything off balance and left me covered in the mess. "Again," Anya said softly, placing a fresh ball of clay in front of me. "Breathe, anchor your elbows, find your own center first." I tried again, and again. Each time, the clay fought me. Each time, my mind raced with images of his phone, his flinch, Jenna's name. But with each failure, my frustration began to harden into a stubborn resolve. This was just clay. It was not my husband. It could not lie to me. It could only respond to the pressure I applied. Meanwhile, in the quiet hours of the night, I wrestled with Japanese. Hiragana characters swam before my eyes. Japanese letter A, Japanese letter I, Japanese letter U, Japanese letter E, Japanese letter O. The sounds were strange in my mouth. It was a mental gymnastics that exhausted my brain into a blessed numbness. There was no room for heartbreak when I was trying to remember the difference between Japanese letter ha and Japanese letter ho. It was a different kind of code, one that promised order and structure, a system where if you learned the rules, they wouldn't betray you. Weeks passed. The turning point, the mini-climax of this scene, came on a rainy Thursday in the pottery studio. I was attempting a simple cylinder. The wheel hummed, the clay spun, and for the first time, my hands found a rhythm. They were firm. They were gentle. I wasn't fighting the clay. I was guiding it. The walls rose, smooth and even, a perfect, hollow form emerging from the formless mass. My breath caught in my throat. It was ugly and lopsided, but it was a cylinder. I had centered it. I had created a vessel from a lump of earth. In that moment, a seismic shift occurred within me. The connection was undeniable. The clay was my grief, my life. I couldn't control the fact that it had been shattered, but I could control what I did with the pieces. I could leave it as a useless, wet lump, or I could knead it and center it and apply pressure and from the ruins create a new shape. A stronger shape. One I designed myself. That night, I didn't dream of Christopher's face. I dreamt of a perfect, beautiful, glazed vase. And when I woke up, the first thing I did wasn't to check my phone for missed messages. It was to practice my Japanese vocabulary. Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, tsukuru, to create. Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, suya, strong. Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Adarashi I knew. The path ahead was still long and shrouded in fog. But I had found my first tools for the journey. The earthy grit of clay under my fingernails and the elegant, foreign code of a new language on my tongue. I was no longer just the woman who was betrayed. I was the woman who was learning to build and to speak all over again. The hum of the pottery wheel had become a new kind of meditation, the gritty texture of clay under my fingernails a badge of progress. My Japanese vocabulary was expanding, slowly, stubbornly. Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, kokoro, heart. Japanese letter, tsugi, next. I was building a new lexicon for a new life. But between the focused silence of the studio and the mental gymnastics of a new language, there were vast, empty chasms of time. The silence in the house was still a presence, but now it was a challenger I was learning to face, not an oppressor I succumbed to. It was on one of these silent afternoons, during the twins' piano lesson, that I found myself wandering the streets of downtown Boise, aimless. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. I passed by cafes we used to visit, parks where we'd push the girls on swings, and each familiar landmark was a small, sharp prick to my heart. I was a ghost in my own city, haunting the places of my past life. Driven by a need to escape the geography of my marriage, I pushed open the heavy oak door of the chapter and verse. A bookstore I'd always meant to visit but never had. It was Christopher, who'd been the voracious reader of novels. I'd always been content with recipe books and parenting manuals. Stepping inside was like crossing a border into neutral territory. The store was a labyrinth of towering shelves, smelling of old paper, fresh ink, and polished wood. It was quiet, save for the soft rustle of pages and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I drifted through the aisles, my fingers trailing over the spines of countless stories, other lives, other worlds. I felt unmoored, a little lost. What did I even like to read? Who was I beyond a baker, a mother, a wife? I found myself in the literature section, staring at a wall of imposing classics, feeling utterly inadequate. My gaze fell upon a title, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It felt a little too on the nose. A wry, sad smile touched my lips. I reached for it, my hand brushing against another's at the exact same moment. I flinched back instinctively, the memory of Christopher's recoil still a fresh wound. "So sorry," a male voice said, warm and calm. I looked up. The man was tall, with kind eyes the color of weathered denim and a sprinkling of gray in his dark hair. He wore a simple, comfortable flannel shirt and held a well-loved copy of a sci-fi novel I didn't recognize. He didn't look like Christopher. He didn't look like anyone I knew. He looked solid, grounded. "It's okay," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "You can have it." I gestured vaguely at the book, though I had no idea which one he'd been reaching for. He smiled, and the lines around his eyes crinkled. I wasn't going for Kundera. I was aiming for the Asimov next to it. "Heavy stuff for a Tuesday afternoon," he said, nodding toward the unbearable lightness of being. "You sure you're ready for that?" His tone was light, conversational, without a hint of pretension. It was simply an observation. And in that moment, after months of tiptoeing around the eggshells of my own shattered life, his direct, gentle humor was so disarming I almost laughed. "I'm not sure I'm ready for anything," I said, and the honesty of the statement surprised me. I never would have admitted such a thing to a stranger a few months ago. He regarded me for a moment, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding. "Yeah, I've had those seasons." He slid the Asimov from the shelf. "This is my escape, robots and galactic empires, fewer complicated human emotions." "Does it work?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Sometimes. Other times, you just end up with a robot having an existential crisis, which is arguably worse." He shrugged, his smile returning. "It's a bold choice, going straight for the existential Czech philosophers. I respect it." We stood there for a moment in a comfortable, slightly awkward silence. The world outside the bookstore, with its memories and its pain, felt very far away. Here, between the stacks, I was just a woman talking to a man about books. "I should probably start with something a little lighter," I admitted, finally stepping back from the Kundera. "Ah, the gateway books. Wise." He scanned the shelf, his eyes alight with a genuine love for the hunt. "What's your poison? Mystery? A sweeping romance? A comedy that will make you snort laugh in public and embarrass yourself?" The word romance made my stomach clench. "Maybe just a good story, one where people figure things out." He nodded, as if I'd said something profoundly sensible. He pulled a book from a lower shelf. It had a colorful, whimsical cover. "This, trust me. It's about a woman who inherits a falling-apart bookstore in a small English village. There's a stubborn gardener, a lot of tea, and a very ugly dog that saves the day. It's my sister's favorite. She says it's like a warm hug, a warm hug." The concept was so foreign, so desperately needed, that my eyes welled up. I blinked rapidly, looking down at the book he offered. The little bookstore on Cherry Lane. It sounded safe. "Thank you," I said, taking it. My voice was thick. "Anytime," he said softly. He seemed to sense the shift in my energy, the sudden vulnerability. He didn't push. He just gave me a little space. "Well, I should let you browse. Enjoy the book." He began to turn away, and a sudden, irrational panic seized me. This tiny, human connection, this brief, kind interaction, was a flicker of light in my profound darkness, and I wasn't ready to let it go. "Wait," I said, the word tumbling out. He turned back, eyebrows raised in polite question. I floundered, grasping for something, anything to say. My mind, fogged by grief and social isolation, went blank. Then it landed on the most absurd, irrelevant thing. I was just wondering, what's your favorite bad 80s movie?" The question hung in the dusty air between us, utterly ridiculous. He stared at me for a second, and then a slow, brilliant grin spread across his face. It transformed him, making him look younger, more mischievous. "Better Off Dead," he said without a moment's hesitation. "No contest. It's a cinematic travesty. It's got everything. A kid obsessed with his paper route, a creepy animated hamburger, a Japanese rock band that sings, Van Halen covers, and John Cusack standing under a window with a boombox, though arguably for the wrong girl. The dialogue is permanently seared into my brain." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice in a mock conspiratorial tone. "I want my $2. The delivery was so perfect, so unexpectedly goofy, that the laugh that burst out of me was genuine, loud, and startled a woman browsing several shelves away. I clapped a hand over my mouth, my shoulders shaking. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed like that. It felt like cracking open a sealed door inside me, letting fresh air into a musty room. Tears of mirth now, not grief, stung my eyes. That sounds terrifying. It's a masterpiece of mediocrity, he affirmed, his own eyes twinkling. The kind of movie you can quote for hours. It's a required part of my personality at this point. I'm Alex, by the way. Evelyn, I said, and for the first time, my name didn't feel like a synonym for betrayed wife. It just felt like my name. Evelyn, he repeated. It was nice to meet you. I hope the book helps. He gave a final, small wave and walked away, disappearing around a corner of science fiction. I stood there, holding the little bookstore on Cherry Lane, the echo of my laughter still in the air, the phrase, "I want my $2," playing on a loop in my mind. The encounter had been brief, no more than 5 minutes, but it was a pivot, a mini-climax in the quiet saga of my recovery. I hadn't been seen as a victim. I hadn't been pitied. I'd been a person, talking about books and bad movies. And in the eyes of a kind, funny man named Alex, I had, for a fleeting moment, felt interesting. I had felt like a possibility. I bought the book. I walked out of the bookstore, the autumn air feeling less sharp, the city feeling less haunted. I had a new book in my bag, a ridiculous quote in my head, and the faint, terrifying, exhilarating sensation of a new door cracking open. The book was, as promised, a warm hug. I read it in 2 nights, curled on the couch in the silence that now felt contemplative rather than oppressive. I found myself smiling at the stubborn gardener, tearing up at the ugly dog's heroism. It was a safe harbor for my battered emotions. And Alex's voice, his ridiculous movie quote, became a frequent, unwelcome but welcome guest in my thoughts. I want my $2. It would pop into my head while I was kneading dough or trying to decipher Japanese verb conjugations, and a small, private smile would touch my lips. It was the first thing that had felt truly, exclusively mine since my life imploded. A week after the bookstore encounter, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. My heart, trained by years of Christopher's secrecy, leapt into a frantic rhythm of dread. But the text was simple and utterly disarming. Unknown number, this is Alex. From the bookstore invasion of existential literature and cinematic crimes. I hope the book was a suitable warm hug. I was at the hardware store and saw something that made me think of you. And bad 80s movies. No pressure, but if you're free this weekend and want to build something terribly, I'm your guy. Below the text was a picture. It was a flat-pack box for a large, mid-century modern-style bookshelf. The cover image showed a serene, perfectly styled living room. Scrawled across the image in digital marker was a speech bubble coming from the woman in the stock photo. I have no idea which part is Aminus 17, but I'm blaming the instructions. I stared at the phone, a war waging inside me. Fear, cold and familiar, whispered of complications, of more pain, of trusting another stranger. But a newer, braver part of me, the part that had burned his things and centered clay, saw the humor, the sheer, unsexy normality of it. This wasn't a proposition for a clandestine affair. It was an invitation to build a bookshelf. It was so bizarrely, wonderfully mundane. I took a deep breath. My fingers trembled as I typed. I'm fairly certain the instructions are the real villain in that story. Saturday works. But I'm warning you, my spatial reasoning is a tragedy of epic 80s proportions. His reply was almost instantaneous. Alex, perfect. I specialize in tragic epics. My place. I'll provide the screwdrivers, Allen wrenches, and moral support. 10 a.m., he sent the address. I agreed. And for the next 2 days, I existed in a state of low-grade electric anxiety. This wasn't a date. It was a collaborative construction project. The distinction felt important, a safe label for something that felt terrifyingly significant. Saturday morning, I stood outside his apartment building, a modern complex in the heart of downtown, so different from our suburban house. I clutched a bag containing fresh pastries from my kitchen like a shield. He answered the door with the same warm, crinkly-eyed smile, wearing old jeans and a t-shirt with a faded logo for a band I didn't know. His apartment was clean, sparsely but comfortably furnished, with stacks of books everywhere and a large window offering a view of the city waking up. And in the center of the living room lay the beast. The flat-pack box, already opened to reveal a terrifying sea of cardboard, polystyrene, and ominously packaged bits of wood. So, he said, rubbing his hands together. The adventure begins. You ready to face our nemesis? He gestured to the thick, folded packet of instructions. I'm not sure anyone is ever ready, I said, handing him the pastry bag. I brought bribes. A woman after my own heart, he declared, peeking inside. All right, with sugar on our side, we cannot fail. We laid out all the parts, organizing them into neat, hopeful piles as the instructions dictated. Step 1 seemed straightforward. Connect panel A to panel B using dowels C and D. We managed it, the boards slotting together with a satisfying thud. See, Alex said, grinning, we're geniuses. Step 2 was where the comedy of errors began. It involved attaching a complex back panel with a series of tiny, impossibly identical screws. The diagram was a cryptic mess of arrows and exploded views that made no logical sense. Okay, Alex said, squinting at the paper. It says to use screw F-12, but I only see F-11 and F-13. I peered into the small plastic bag. I think F-12 is the one that looks exactly like F-11, but has a slightly different thread that we can't possibly perceive with the human eye. He laughed, a rich, easy sound. Ah, the old imperceptible thread trick. A classic. We tried it with F-11. The screw went in halfway and then stuck, refusing to budge in either direction. We both pulled on the screwdriver, grunting, our heads closed together. I could smell his shampoo, something clean and citrusy. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of Christopher's cologne, but this was different. This was real, unperfumed for an affair. Abort! Abort! Alex cried, letting go. We're stripping the head. We'll create a permanent monument to our failure. We collapsed back on the floor, laughing. We spent the next 10 minutes trying to extract the rogue screw, a process that involved pliers, a lot of muttered curses, and him holding the panel steady while I pulled with all my might. When it finally came free with a screech, we cheered as if we just split the atom. This was the mini-climax of the scene, not a kiss, not a profound confession, but a shared, ridiculous struggle against a common, inanimate enemy. In my old life, a task like this would have been fraught with tension. Christopher's impatience would have simmered, my anxiety to do it perfectly would have spiked, and it would have ended with one of us walking away in frustration. With Alex, it was a puzzle, a shared joke. There was no judgment, only collaborative problem-solving. Hours passed. We built the skeleton of the bookshelf, our movements falling into a rhythm. He would hold the heavy parts, I would align the tricky corners. We invented names for the various tools, the torque monster for the Allen wrench, and created backstories for the people in the instruction manual. He kept up a steady stream of terrible quotes from Better Off Dead, delivering them with the solemnity of Shakespeare. Go that way, really fast. If something gets in your way, turn. He said this as we attempted to maneuver the now assembled, wobbly monolith into its corner. I was holding my side, aching from laughter. You're insane. It's a life philosophy, he deadpanned. Finally, it was done. It stood in the corner, a testament to our perseverance. It was slightly crooked. One of the shelves had a discernible dip. But it was standing. It was solid. We sat on his floor, leaning against his couch, covered in a fine dust of particle board, staring at our creation. The late afternoon sun streamed through the big window, painting everything in gold. It's beautiful, I said, my voice soft with a tired contentment I hadn't felt in years. It's the most magnificent, lopsided bookshelf in the entire world, he agreed. He looked at me, his expression turning more serious, though the kindness in his eyes never dimmed. Thank you, Evelyn, for the pastries, for your spatial reasoning tragedy, for today. The silence that fell between us then was different from all the silences I'd endured. It was warm and full and buzzing with something unspoken. I felt seen, not for the drama of my story, but for my ability to laugh while fighting a screw. I felt like a partner in a silly, wonderful conspiracy. Thank you for the instructions, I said softly, and the moral support. I left his apartment that evening feeling a weight had lifted, replaced by a new, unfamiliar lightness. I hadn't just helped build a bookshelf. I had, piece by piece, joke by joke, started to build a new understanding of what connection could feel like. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect romance. It was about shared laughter on a dusty floor, and the quiet, profound satisfaction of creating something, however crooked, together. The crooked bookshelf became a permanent fixture in my mind, a symbol of something fragile yet defiantly standing. The dust from that day seemed to have settled not just on our clothes, but on the sharp, broken edges of my heart, softening them. Alex and I began to text, not with the frantic urgency of new romance, but with the easy, steady rhythm of two people who enjoyed each other's company. We shared bad movie clips, book recommendations, and photos of our daily lives. A cake I'd decorated shaped like a dinosaur, a particularly beautiful sunset from his window. It was a quiet, digital courtship that felt like a balm. But the past is a tenant that never fully vacates. It sublets a room in your mind and plays its music at all hours. My grief was no longer the raging inferno of the backyard pyre, but a cold, silent fog that would roll in without warning. It happened at the grocery store, seeing a man who had Christopher's build reaching for the same brand of coffee. It happened when our song played in a department store, forcing me to abandon a full cart and flee. It happened in the dead of night, the memory of his flinch as vivid and painful as the day it happened. This was the new battlefield. Not the dramatic confrontations, but the silent war against the echoes. The mini-climax of this scene came on a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks after the bookshelf assembly. I was meeting Alex for coffee at a small, independent place tucked between a dry cleaner and a bank. The air was heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and roasting beans. I was looking forward to it all morning, a bright spot on my calendar. But as I got ready, a wave of debilitating anxiety washed over me. It was a physical sensation, a tightening in my chest, a shortness of breath. What was I doing? This was a betrayal of my own pain. Letting someone in felt like I was erasing the magnitude of what Christopher had done, like I was saying it didn't matter enough to grieve forever. I almost texted him to cancel. My fingers hovered over the screen, crafting excuses. I'm not feeling well, the girls need me, something came up. But then I looked at my hands. I saw the faint, permanent stain of clay under one nail. I remembered the feel of the spinning wheel, the fight for center. I remembered the sheer, willful act of throwing a match into a can of memories. I had not done all that to be defeated by a panic attack on a rainy Tuesday. I went. I walked into the coffee shop, the bell jingling too cheerfully. He was already there at a small table by the window, reading a book. He looked up and smiled, but it faltered as he saw my face. "Evelyn, are you okay?" I sat down, my hands trembling slightly around my purse straps. I could lie. I could give him the polished, "I'm fine" that everyone expects. But the authenticity of our connection, built on lopsided bookshelves and bad movies, demanded more. "No," I said, the word a shaky exhale. I looked out the window at the rain-streaked glass. "Not really, it's a bad echo day." He closed his book, giving me his full attention. "Echo day?" I tried to explain, the fog. The way a smell, a song, a turn of phrase could be a trapdoor, sending me plummeting back into the moment of discovery, the scent of vanilla and despair in that therapist's office. I told him about the flinch. I hadn't told anyone that detail, not even my sister. It was too intimate, too damning, but I told him. "It's like my body remembers the betrayal before my mind does," I finished, my voice thin. "And it feels disloyal. To be here, to be smiling, to be thinking about," I trailed off, gesturing vaguely between us. He was silent for a long moment, just listening to the rain and the hiss of the espresso machine. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell me to just get over it or that time heals all wounds. He simply absorbed the weight of what I'd shared. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice low and sincere, "for telling me." That was all, but it was everything. In that moment, he wasn't a potential new partner competing with the ghost of the old. He was a witness, an ally. He saw the battlefield, and he didn't retreat from the scars. "You know," he said, a gentle smile returning to his eyes. "In Better Off Dead, after the disastrous dinner with his girlfriend's parents, Lane Mayer goes home and his mom serves him TV dinners. And she says, every now and then say, once a week, 'I think you should have a salad.' It's the most nonsensical, non sequitur line. It has nothing to do with anything. But it's perfect. Because sometimes, life is a disastrous dinner and your mom offers you a TV dinner and a salad. The pain is real. The absurdity is real. They exist in the same space." I stared at him, and then a slow, real smile broke through my anxiety. It was the most perfect, ridiculous, profound thing anyone could have said. He wasn't dismissing my pain. He was placing it in the context of a universe that is both cruel and hilariously absurd. He was acknowledging the echo and answering it with a quote about a TV dinner. The tightness in my chest loosened. The fog didn't magically lift, but it thinned, allowing light to filter through. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about our favorite comfort foods, our childhood pets, our dreams that had nothing to do with our careers or past relationships. He shared his own echoes, a past relationship that had ended not with betrayal, but with a slow, sad fading away. He spoke of his own periods of fog. It was a conversation of mutual revelation, not as trauma dumping, but as a careful, respectful exchange of maps to our respective inner landscapes. I was not a damaged woman to be fixed. I was a person with a history, and he was interested in all of it, the scorched earth and the new, tentative sprouts of green. Walking home in the softening rain, I felt different. The echo was still there, a faint whisper in the distance, but it was no longer a scream that controlled me. I had given it a voice, and in doing so, I had robbed it of some of its power. Alex hadn't rescued me from it. He had simply stood beside me in the storm, offering not an umbrella, but the unwavering certainty that I could withstand the rain. He was the answer to the echo, not because he silenced it, but because his presence made me strong enough to listen to it without falling apart. The path forward was still mine to walk, but I was no longer walking it alone. The air in my kitchen was thick with the scent of chocolate and vanilla, a familiar blanket of sweetness that usually brought me peace. Today, it felt like a shield I was desperately constructing against the incoming tide. The twins' 8th birthday party was in 3 hours. 8, a number that felt monumental, a checkpoint in a journey I had once imagined taking side by side with Christopher. Now I was navigating it alone, a solo captain on a ship that was supposed to have a co-pilot. The cake was a masterpiece of sugary denial. A 2-tiered fantasy land of buttercream and fondant, decorated as a magical forest, complete with edible moss, chocolate bark trees, and 2 little fondant foxes with the girls' names piped delicately at their feet. Chloe had requested it. A forest where we can have adventures, Mommy, just us. Her words had been a stab of painful pride. She was building her own fortresses, just like me. I was piping the final leaves onto a tree when my phone vibrated on the counter. Christopher. Again. He'd been calling and texting for days, a growing storm of guilt and insistence. He wanted to come to the party. He was their father, he had a right, it would be wrong to exclude him. Each message was a rock thrown at my carefully constructed calm. The final text I'd read an hour ago had been the worst. They'll wonder why I'm not there, Evelyn. Don't make me the bad guy in this, it's their birthday. The rage that surged through me was so white-hot it made my hand tremble, ruining a perfect fondant leaf. He had made himself the bad guy. He had chosen to shatter their world. And now he wanted to waltz in with a wrapped present and a smile, pretending the foundation hadn't been vaporized. The audacity was a physical blow. But beneath the rage was a cold, gripping fear. What if he was right? What if their birthday was forever marred by his absence? What if my need to protect myself, to not have to face him, to not have to smell his cologne and see the ghost of our life together in his eyes, was selfish? What if I was hurting them more? The mini-climax of this scene wasn't the party itself. It was the war I fought in my kitchen, surrounded by sugar and sprinkles. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Alex. Alex, thinking of you today. Remember, you're the one who builds forests out of cake. You've got this. And if you need a quote from Revenge of the Nerds to get you through, I have a few on standby. A sob caught in my throat, part laugh, part cry. He knew. He hadn't asked for details, but he'd listened weeks ago when I'd mentioned my anxiety about this day. His text wasn't an offer to fix it. It was a message in a bottle, sent across the stormy sea, reminding me I was not alone on my island. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Christopher's name. I had to make a decision. The old Evelyn, the one who centered her life around his comfort, would have capitulated. She would have swallowed her pain to present a unified, happy front for the girls, for the neighbors, for the world. But the new Evelyn, the one with clay under her nails and Japanese verbs in her head, knew that some fractures cannot be glued back together with frosting. I typed my reply to him, my heart hammering against my ribs. The words were firm, final, and for the first time, entirely for the protection of my children and myself, not as a weapon against him. Me. You will not be coming to the party. Your choices have consequences. We will arrange a separate time for you to see the girls and give them your gifts. Do not make this day about you. I put the phone down, my entire body trembling. I had drawn a boundary. It was the hardest, most terrifying thing I had done since walking out of that therapist's office. I half expected the world to end. Instead, the kitchen was just silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. The cake glistened under the lights. I had stood my ground. The party was a whirlwind of shrieking children, bright wrapping paper, and the chaotic joy that only a pack of 8-year-olds can generate. We held it in the backyard, the scene of the pyre now transformed into a carnival of laughter. I watched Lily and Chloe, their faces smeared with chocolate, running with their friends, and a fragile hope began to bloom in my chest. They were okay, they were more than okay, they were joyful. And then the second wave hit, the one I had dreaded. It was during the present opening. Lily, my sensitive soul, was clutching a new stuffed owl. She looked around at the circle of beaming faces, her own smile faltering. "Where's Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and clear, cutting through the noise. "He said he was going to get me the big owl with the glasses. The one I showed him." The world screeched to a halt. All the other parents looked at me, a mixture of pity and awkwardness on their faces. Chloe glared at her sister, her little face a mask of protective fury. "He's not coming, stupid. They're divorced." The word, so clinical and final, hung in the air. Lily's face crumpled. The dam broke, and huge, heartbreaking sobs racked her small body. "I want Daddy. I want my daddy." I moved through the crowd, my heart shattering into a million new pieces. I gathered her in my arms, holding her tight as she cried into my shoulder, her tears soaking through my shirt. I rocked her, whispering nonsense, my own eyes burning. This was it, the moment I had feared. The proof that I had failed them, that my boundary had caused this public, gut-wrenching pain. Just then, a voice cut through the tension, gentle but firm. "You know," Alex said, stepping into the circle. He had arrived minutes earlier, lingering quietly on the periphery with a gift, not wanting to intrude. Now he knelt down so he was at Lily's eye level, his presence calm and steady. "That is a magnificent owl, but it looks very wise, and you know what wise owls need." Lily, intrigued despite her tears, peeked out from my shoulder. "What?" "They need a proper introduction to the local wildlife," Alex said, his tone grave, as if discussing matters of international diplomacy. "And I happen to know there's a very important squirrel who lives in that big oak tree over there who has been waiting for a meeting. His name is Sir Reginald Nutkins, and he's in charge of acorn distribution for this entire yard. It's a very big job." Lily stared at him, her sobs subsiding to hiccups. "A squirrel, a knighted squirrel," Alex corrected her solemnly. Then he slipped into a terrible, exaggerated British accent. "I say, old bean, fancy a spot of acorn inventory. The South Quadrant is a right mess." It was so absurd, so perfectly timed and delivered, that Chloe, who had been scowling, let out a giggle. Then another. Lily's tear-streaked face broke into a wobbly smile. "Can we go see him?" Lily whispered. "We can attempt a diplomatic mission," Alex said, standing up and offering her his hand. "But we must be stealthy. Squirrels are skittish negotiators." He looked at Chloe. "We'll need a head of security. You look suitably fierce." Chloe puffed out her chest, the anger gone, replaced by purpose. The three of them, my 2 daughters and this kind, funny man, tiptoed dramatically toward the big oak tree, leaving the stunned party guests behind. I stood there, watching them, the weight on my chest lifting so suddenly I felt lightheaded. He hadn't tried to be their father. He hadn't tried to dismiss their pain or mine. He had simply met them in their world, with imagination and silliness, and offered them a rope to climb out of their sadness. He had turned a moment of devastating grief into a silly game, without ever making me feel like I had failed to handle it. The party wound down, the last guest left. The backyard was a mess of trampled grass, discarded plates, and the lingering echoes of laughter. The twins were inside, exhausted and happy, examining their haul of presents. Alex helped me clean up, gathering paper plates and deflated balloons in comfortable silence. Finally, he stopped, leaning on a trash bag and looking at me. "You," he said softly, "are a force of nature. You know that, right?" I shook my head, tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude. I felt like I was failing them all day, and then with Lily, "You were holding her," he interrupted gently. "You were her safe harbor in the storm. I just provided a little distracting weather." He smiled. "That's what you do, you build the forest. I just make funny noises at the squirrels." I looked at this man, really looked at him. He wasn't a knight in shining armor. He was a man with a trash bag in one hand and a profound understanding of the human heart in the other. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, in a coffee shop, covered in dust, and now, as a mother grappling with the fallout of her broken marriage, and he hadn't flinched. Not once. The party was over. The cake was eaten. The tears had been shed and then dried with laughter. And as I stood in my backyard under the emerging stars, I knew a new chapter had begun. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future where moments of sadness could be met with kindness, understanding, and the perfectly timed quote from a bad movie. We were a lopsided bookshelf of a family, but we were standing, and we were strong. The memory of the birthday party, of Lily's tears transmuted into laughter by Alex's silly squirrel impersonation, had become a talisman I carried with me. It was proof that joy and sorrow could coexist, that a broken thing could still function, even beautifully. But there was one final, formal severance to be made: the legal dissolution. The paperwork that would make the end of my marriage a matter of court record, not just a burning in the backyard or a silent understanding in an empty house. The lawyer's office was everything the therapist's office had been, but colder. Where Dr. Evans's space had promised healing, this one promised division. It was all sharp angles, chrome and glass, with a view of the Boise foothills that felt like a taunt, such beauty existing just beyond this sterile, heart-shrinking process. The air smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant and expensive paper, a far cry from vanilla or wood smoke. I sat in a plush leather chair, my hands folded in my lap, my posture rigid. Christopher was already there, seated across the wide, polished mahogany table from me. He looked older. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his shoulders slumped in a way that might have once stirred my pity. Now it just looked like the posture of a man facing the consequences of his actions. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Our lawyer, a brisk, efficient woman named Miss Davies, laid out the documents. The separation agreement. A meticulously crafted map of the ruins, dividing assets, debts, and time with our daughters. It was all there in black and white, the legal code for the end of us. Christopher had already signed his copies. These were for me. "This formalizes the terms we discussed, Evelyn," Miss Davies said, her voice calm and professional. "The division of the marital assets is as agreed, with the primary residence remaining with you and Christopher retaining his retirement accounts and the vehicle. The parenting plan outlines shared custody, with the girls residing with you primarily and Christopher having them every other weekend and one evening during the week." She slid the stack of papers toward me. A pen, sleek and cold, lay beside them. This was the mini-climax, not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, profound point of no return. Signing these papers felt more final than any burning pyre. The fire had been an emotional purge. This was a cold, intellectual surrender to the facts. It was the official death certificate for the life I had built. My eyes scanned the text, but the words blurred. Petitioner, respondent, irreconcilable differences. It was all so bloodless. It didn't capture the 9 years of shared life, the whispered dreams in the dark, the feel of his hand in mine during my labors with the twins, the thousands of meals shared, the inside jokes, the slow, comfortable silence of a Sunday morning. It didn't capture the way he flinched. I looked up at Christopher. He was staring at his own hands, clenched on the table. "Do you have anything you'd like to say to Evelyn before she signs, Christopher?" Miss Davies prompted, her tone neutral. He finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were red-rimmed, full of a sorrow that, for the first time, looked genuine. Not the performative guilt of the therapy session, but the deep, weary regret of a man who has lost everything and knows it is his own fault. "I'm sorry, Evie," he whispered, using the old nickname. It felt like a violation. I never wanted to hurt you or the girls. It was a madness." I didn't speak, I just held his gaze. The apology was too little, too late, and it changed nothing. The madness had been a series of conscious choices: to lie, to deceive, to flinch away from my touch, to guard his phone in a room meant for truth. An affair wasn't a single stumble. It was a long walk down a path away from your family, and he had taken every step. His apology wasn't for me, I realized. It was for him. A final, feeble attempt to buff the tarnish from his own soul before I made the end official. He wanted absolution, or at least acknowledgement of his remorse. But I had none to give. My forgiveness, if it ever came, was a journey for me alone, not a commodity to be handed over in a lawyer's office to ease his conscience. The silence stretched, becoming heavy and uncomfortable. Miss Davies cleared her throat gently. I picked up the pen. It was heavier than it looked. My hand, which could steady a spinning lump of clay into a perfect cylinder, now trembled. This was it. The last thread being cut. I thought of the girls, of Lily's question at the party. "Where's Daddy?" This document was the answer. It was the new structure, the new map. It was the promise of stability, even if that stability was born from fracture. I thought of Alex, of his text. "You're the one who builds forests out of cake." I was building a new forest now, one with clear boundaries and strong, healthy trees. Signing this was not an act of destruction. It was the first, foundational act of that new construction. I leaned forward and began to sign. Evelyn Murray Ross, my maiden name, reclaimed. The pen scratched against the paper, a dry, decisive sound. I signed the first page, then the second. I initialed where Miss Davies pointed. Each mark of the pen was a release. I was not signing away my past. I was signing for my future. I was signing for the quiet nights in my modern apartment, for the Japanese lessons, for the pottery studio, for the man who knew every line from Better Off Dead and how to comfort a crying child with a story about a knighted squirrel. When it was done, I placed the pen down with a final, soft click. I felt empty, but it was a clean emptiness, like a room that has been cleared of old, broken furniture, ready for something new. Christopher was crying silently, his shoulders shaking. I felt a distant pang, the ghost of the love I once had for him, but it was just that, a ghost. It had no power over me anymore. "It's done," Miss Davies said softly. I stood up, my legs steady. I didn't look at Christopher again. I walked out of the office, through the chrome and glass, and into the bright, clear Idaho day. The sun was warm on my face. The legalities were complete. The marriage was over. But as I stood on the sidewalk, taking a deep, shuddering breath of free air, I realized something with stunning clarity. The story wasn't about the divorce. The story was about what I had built in the ruins. The signature wasn't an ending. It was a permission slip. It was the official start of the rest of my life. The signed divorce papers sat in a sealed envelope on my kitchen counter for a full day before I mailed them. They were not a symbol of defeat, but a weight I had willingly put down. The space they left behind felt light, airy, full of potential. My new apartment, with its clean lines and city views, was slowly starting to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. The girls had their own rooms painted in colors they chose themselves. A violent shade of purple for Chloe, a serene sea green for Lily. We were putting down roots in new soil. But a crucial test remained. Alex had met the girls in the controlled chaos of a birthday party, where he could play the role of magical, funny interloper. That was one thing. Having him over for a casual, quiet dinner, integrating him into the mundane rhythm of our weeknight life. Homework, mac and cheese, bath times, was something else entirely. This was the frontier. This was where the theoretical new family faced the practical, messy reality. I was a bundle of nerves all day. I cleaned the apartment twice. I debated a dozen different menu options before settling on simple, kid-friendly tacos, a build-your-own buffet that felt safe and interactive. What if the girls were shy? What if they resented him? What if the easy chemistry Alex and I had built fractured under the pressure of two small, watchful pairs of eyes? The doorbell rang at 6 p.m. sharp. The twins, who had been bickering over a marker, fell silent and looked at me with wide, curious eyes. "Remember, Alex is coming for dinner," I said, my voice a little too bright. "Is he your boyfriend?" Chloe asked, her tone accusatory. We're friends who enjoy each other's company," I said, opting for diplomatic truth. Lily, clutching her stuffed owl, just stared at the door. I took a steadying breath and opened it. Alex stood there, holding a paper bag in one hand and a small, flat box in the other. He wasn't wearing a suit or trying too hard. He was in his familiar jeans and a soft-looking sweater. His smile was warm, but I saw a flicker of his own nervousness in his eyes. This mattered to him, too. "Hey," he said, then he held up the bag. "I brought guacamole, from that place you like." And he held up the box, looking at the girls. "I brought a peace offering, or a bribe, depending on how the tacos turn out." He stepped inside, and the atmosphere shifted. He didn't try to force a hug or overwhelm them. He just stood in the entryway, allowing them to inspect him. "What is it?" Chloe asked, her curiosity overpowering her suspicion. "It's a puzzle," he said, kneeling down to their level, placing the box on the floor. "Of the solar system. But it glows in the dark." Chloe, my little scientist, was immediately intrigued. She peered at the box. "Pluto isn't a planet anymore." "I know," Alex said gravely. "A tragic demotion. But I thought we could make an exception for old time's sake. We can put it right on the edge and call it a dwarf planet ambassador." A small smile played on Chloe's lips. It was the perfect response. He hadn't talked down to her. He'd engaged her on her level. Lily, still silent, inched closer. She pointed a tiny finger at the box. "I like Jupiter, it has a spot." "It does, the great red spot. A storm so big it could swallow our whole planet," Alex said, his voice full of wonder. "Maybe after dinner we can start it, if it's okay with your mom." Both girls looked at me. I nodded, my throat tight. "That sounds like a great plan." The mini-climax of the scene came not during dinner, which was a messy, cheerful affair full of spilled salsa and laughter, but after. While I was cleaning up, I heard the soft clatter of puzzle pieces from the living room. I peeked around the corner. Alex was on the floor, his long legs folded under him. Chloe was beside him, meticulously sorting edge pieces, her brow furrowed in concentration. And Lily, my shy Lily, was sitting tucked right up against his side, her head resting against his arm as she carefully examined a piece shaped like Saturn's rings. "It goes here," she said softly, pointing to a spot near the top. "You're absolutely right," Alex murmured, his voice low and gentle. "You have a master puzzler's eye." He didn't put his arm around her. He didn't force the contact. He just sat there, solid and warm, becoming a piece of the furniture, a part of the landscape of their evening. He was being a steady presence for them to lean on, literally and figuratively. He was meeting them with the same patience and lack of expectation he had met me with in the coffee shop. I watched, hidden in the doorway, as Lily handed him a piece she couldn't place. His large, capable hands took it carefully, his fingers brushing against her small ones. "Let's see. I think this is a bit of Neptune." "It's very blue, like your sweater," Lily observed. He looked down, pretending to be surprised. "So it is, how about that?" In that simple, quiet exchange, something profound settled in the room. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a forced blending. It was an organic, gentle weaving. He was not trying to replace their father. He was simply offering them another adult who was safe, who was kind, who listened, and who knew a startling amount about gaseous giants and bad 80s movies. Later, after the puzzle was well underway and the girls were tucked into bed, Alex helped me finish the dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, him washing, me drying, in a comfortable silence that was now a familiar hallmark of our time together. "Thank you," I said softly, placing a dried plate in the cupboard. "For them, for all of that." He passed me a soapy glass. "They're incredible, Evelyn, truly. Thank you for letting me in." He didn't say into your life or into your heart. He said into the messy, beautiful, complicated reality of it. Into the mac and cheese and the glow-in-the-dark puzzles and the bedtime stories. I finished drying the glass and turned to face him. The city lights twinkled outside the window behind him. I reached out and took his hand, his wet, soapy hand, and laced my fingers through his. It was the first time I had initiated the contact, without fear, without the ghost of a flinch haunting me. "Akari," I said softly. It was one of the first Japanese phrases I'd learned. It meant welcome home. He didn't know the word, but he understood the meaning in my eyes, in the pressure of my hand. He smiled, that slow, crinkly-eyed smile that had become the anchor of my new world. "I'm here," he whispered. And he was. Not as a guest, not as a distraction, but as a welcome, integral piece of the puzzle we were all slowly, carefully putting back together. The glow-in-the-dark puzzle, once a peace offering, now held a place of honor on the living room wall, a permanent constellation in our new home. The easy integration of Alex into our weeknight rhythm was a miracle I still sometimes pinched myself over. But life, I had learned, was not a straight line from broken to fixed. It was a spiral, and sometimes it circled back to old wounds, not to reopen them, but to show you how much they had healed. The trigger was an email. The subject line was innocuous. Final dissolution of marital property house, sale closing documents. Christopher and I had finally sold the house, the one with the white picket fence and the backyard that had held both a pyre and a birthday party. The proceeds had been split, the last financial tether severed. Attached were digital copies of the final walkthrough photos. I shouldn't have looked, but a part of me needed to. I clicked. There it was, the empty living room. The kitchen with the granite countertop where the flinch had happened. The girls' old bedroom, now just a blank space with faded patches on the wall where their posters had been. It was a ghost ship, every memory stripped away. And yet, seeing it so hollow, so devoid of the life we had built there, felt like a second death. A quiet, final one. I sat at my kitchen island in my modern apartment, the city buzzing below, and cried. Not the raging sobs of betrayal, but the soft, weary tears of goodbye. The girls were at Christopher's for the weekend. The silence in the apartment, usually so full of potential, felt vast and lonely. I was adrift again, the anchor of that physical place gone. The doorbell rang. Alex. We had plans to finally tackle the last unpacked box, the one labeled Misk, which was a terrifying black hole of random possessions. He took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. He just wrapped his arms around me, his solid, quiet presence a bulwark against the tide of nostalgia. The house closed, I mumbled into his sweater. Ah, he said, understanding immediately. He held me for a long moment, then pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders. Okay, change of plans. We're not unpacking that box. We're not? Nope. We're building something. He led me to the large, blank wall in the dining area, the one I hadn't known what to do with. From his backpack, he pulled out a long, rolled-up tube of paper. He unrolled it carefully, spreading it across the floor. It wasn't a poster or a print, it was an architectural blueprint. What is this? I asked, bewildered. It's a floor plan, he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Of this apartment. I got it from the building manager. I told him I was a structural engineer and we were worried about load-bearing walls for a bookshelf. He winked. I am, in fact, not a structural engineer. I stared at the blueprint, at the precise lines and technical notations that mapped out the space we were standing in. It was the skeleton of our home. Now, Alex said, producing a large, fresh piece of vellum paper and a set of architect's pens. We are going to make a new one, the real one. This was the mini-climax. Not a dramatic farewell to the old house, but the active, joyful creation of the new home's soul. He sat on the floor and I joined him. Okay, he began, his tone light but purposeful. Legend first. What are the sacred spaces? He drew a small heart on the vellum over the spot where the girls' rooms were. Chloe's laboratory of fierce discovery. He drew another. Lily's sanctuary for wise owls and quiet thoughts. A smile broke through my tears. I took a pen. I drew a mixing bowl and a whisk over the kitchen island. Evelyn's command center for sugar and sorcery. He drew a tiny, lopsided bookshelf in the living room corner. Site of the great construction. Then, he started drawing the invisible lines. He drew a dotted path from the kitchen to the living room and labeled it Primary Raceway for Saturday morning pancake emergencies. He drew a star on the ceiling above the dining table and wrote location of best dad jokes and bad movie quotes. I was laughing now, fully, freely. I added my own lines. A squiggly circle in the hallway for impromptu dance party zone. A cloud over the couch for nap fortress. I drew a small, smiling squirrel in the corner of the balcony and labeled it Sir Reginald Nutkins, honorary tenant. We spent hours on that floor, mapping the emotional topography of our home. We weren't just drawing on paper. We were inscribing our shared life, our inside jokes, our hopes, and our hard-won peace onto the very blueprint of the space. We were building a narrative of joy over the grid lines of a stranger's architecture. When we were done, the vellum was a beautiful, chaotic, loving mess. It was the absolute opposite of the sterile, empty photos of the old house. That house had been a stage for a performance that had ended. This apartment, as defined by our handmade blueprint, was a workshop for a real, messy, wonderful life. Alex produced a frame. He'd brought that too, foreseeing this moment, and we carefully mounted our creation. We hung it on the blank wall, right in the center. It wasn't just art, it was a declaration, a constitution. I looked from the blueprint to him, this man who had met my grief not with platitudes, but with puzzles, and my nostalgia not with jealousy, but with a chance to build a new map. You, I said, my voice thick with emotion, you built me a new home. He shook his head, taking my hands. No, Evelyn, you built it. I just helped you read the instructions. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was the foundation. The past was a closed chapter, a sold house, a set of ashes. The future was this blueprint, this man, these girls, this life we were actively, joyfully designing together. The spiral had come full circle, and I was no longer the woman falling, but the architect, standing firmly on solid ground. The air in our modern apartment smelled of lemon polish and possibility. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the beams like tiny, excited spirits. Today was the day. Not a birthday, not a holiday, but a day we had chosen, a day we were building from the ground up. Moving day, not to a new place, but into a new phase, a new truth. The last of the boxes were gone. The only thing left on the floor of the master bedroom was a small, sturdy lockbox. I knelt before it, my heart a steady, confident drum in my chest. Alex stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching me with quiet understanding. He didn't offer to help. This was a ritual I needed to complete alone. Inside the box were the last artifacts of my past life. The final divorce decree, a crisp, clinical document that had once felt like a verdict, but now felt like a release. A few photographs I couldn't bring myself to destroy during the great backyard burning. Pictures of the girls as babies. Moments of pure joy that belonged to them as much as to me, even if the context was broken. And at the very bottom, my old wedding ring. I picked it up. The gold was cool, the diamond catching the light, winking as if it held a secret. It felt foreign in my hand, a relic from a civilization that had collapsed. It held no power over me anymore. No anger, no bitterness, just a distant, quiet acknowledgement of what was and what could never be again. This was the final mini-climax. The last, quiet letting go. I didn't throw it away. Instead, I placed it carefully back in the box with the photos and the decree. I didn't need to destroy these things to be free of them. Their power was gone. They were just objects. History. I closed the lid, clicked the lock, and slid the box to the very back of the closet. It was an archive, not an anchor. I stood up and turned to Alex. He opened his arms, and I walked into them, resting my head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. It was the sound of my present, my future. Okay, he murmured into my hair. More than okay, I said, and I meant it. The doorbell chimed, and the apartment erupted into the happy chaos of our daughters' voices. My sister had brought them over, and they burst into the bedroom, their small faces alight with excitement. Is it time? Is it time now? Chloe demanded, bouncing on her toes. It's time, I confirmed. The five of us, Alex, myself, the twins, and my sister, gathered in the center of the living room, in the space we had defined on our whimsical blueprint. In the middle of the floor lay a large, custom-made wooden nameplate. It was a project Alex and I had worked on for weeks in his friend's woodshop, the scent of sawdust and varnish a new, happy memory. It wasn't ornate. It was simple, solid, beautifully crafted from a single piece of oak. Etched into the wood were two names, Evelyn and Alex. And below that, in smaller, playful script, were the names of our daughters, Chloe and Lily. It was not a legal document. It was not a wedding certificate. It was something more profound in its own way. It was a declaration of family, a chosen foundation. Everyone ready? Alex asked, hefting a small, ceremonial hammer, a ridiculous, over-the-top prop he'd found that was perfectly in line with our ethos. We all placed our hands on the wooden plaque, a stack of hands, young and old. My sister's was on the bottom, a symbol of the support that had held me up. Then mine, then Alex's, then Chloe's small, determined one, and finally, Lily's tiny hand on top. On three, I said. 1, 2, 3. Together, we tapped the plaque with the hammer. It was a soft thud, a quiet, powerful sound that seemed to resonate through the apartment, through our very bones. It was the sound of a door closing gently but firmly, and a new one, wide and sunlit, swinging open. We then took the plaque and together screwed it into the wall right beside our front door. It was our welcome, our identity, our truth. Later, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, we stood on the balcony, the four of us. Alex had his arm around me, and I leaned into him. The girls were leaning against the railing, pointing out the first stars, arguing about which one was Jupiter. I looked at this man who had entered my life with a quote from a bad movie and had stayed to help me build a home. I looked at my daughters, who were resilient and joyful and so loved. I looked at the city lights beginning to twinkle below, each one a story, a life. The journey had been brutal. The betrayal, a searing pain I would carry the memory of like a scar. The grief, a landscape I had to cross alone, but it had led me here, to this balcony, to this family, to myself. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was not just a survivor. I was the architect, the baker, the potter, the student, the mother, the partner. I was the foundation of this beautiful, crooked, perfect life we had built together. The upgrade was complete. And the story, our story, was just beginning.